Dodgers are winning. And I don't care who wins the election. I don't. I'm honest. All my friends know that. And you know what? I don't like Harris a lot, and I hate Trump. No, I don't. I've gotten into this with people. I voted already. I voted for every other office except that. Huh?
Except which?
Huh?
Except which?
I didn't vote for president.
Oh.
See, that gets everybody. Huh?
It's your business.
You know what? And I appreciate you saying that because one of my friends from Atlanta, Georgia, Rudy, when I said that to him, he almost wanted to strangle me on the phone. And I said to him, Rudy, we have a difference of opinion. I accept yours. He's a Trumpy. Huh? No, and he's a psychiatrist. I mean, he's an educated guy, but you know, so I said to him, I said, and this is what I said to him. I said, you know what? I said, he's a despicable human being.
That's putting it
Politely. And you know what he said to me? This is the truth. This will show you. He said, I agree with you, Gary, but I support most of his policies. So how can you argue with that?
I could argue very easily, but I'm not going to because it's not worth it.
You know what? It isn't.
It's not worth it.
Huh?
Just not.
You know, I can't get into guys' mind like this. Oh, you know what? I said to him, let's not talk politics.
Absolutely.
Huh?
Absolutely.
Huh? Right?
I had that situation with my gentleman friend.
Yeah. You know what?
Just no politics.
You know what?
Period.
You know what? I don't even talk politics with my family.
Okay.
Huh?
Ironically, our 1 year anniversary when we met.
Oy vey.
Okay.
Oy vey.
Good morning. No, probably not that fast. It's kind of funny. I don't know if you know I have a gesture.
No, I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. After 13 years, I've never, ever discussed it.
Good for you. You have years left. It's like enjoy your life. Wonderful. I'm thrilled for you. Absolutely. We should all be happy. We should all find our lives, however many times. Absolutely. Work out or the first one dies. We find yes. Absolute loneliness is just terrible.
All right, good morning. Good morning to you in the room and you at home. We're so happy you're here this year for another good year of MID. I do want to instruct people again how to use the mic. This is the way to use the mic, and I do this very, very seriously because the people at home actually paid as much as you did, and they deserve to hear. If it's a short question, oh dear, I'd have to turn off this. I know, I have to turn off the sound. I understand. I will turn off my sound, but I always make sure that things are working. Anyway, please use the mic. If it's a short question, Rabbi will be happy to repeat it. But if you have something lengthy to say, we all want to hear it. Thank you. And thank you for another year with Rabbi Mark. Rosie, anything? He needs no introduction.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm so happy to see everyone again. Here we go. We're getting restarted for the new year. We're going to continue with diaspora Jewish communities, but I want to start that next week. I want to do something different just this week for one class. So I taught a class on religious Zionism at American Jewish University this summer, and it was very, very well received. And I ended the class with a little bit of an explanation to try to understand Israeli politics right this minute, to try to figure out what is going on in Israeli politics that is causing the Netanyahu government to make the decisions that they are making. And people found it so interesting that I thought, let me try to do a very short, that was a 4-week class of an hour and a half class. So let me try to condense that to the most important points for 1 hour with us today, just so that when you leave today and you read in the paper or you look at the news that so-and-so did this or so-and-so did this, you say, oh, okay, I have a little bit of an understanding about why that's important and how it affects the decisions that are being made. Okay, so we have to start our discussion way back with ideas about Zionism. Sure.
And I'm not going to take the mic. Oh, God. There we go. Okay. From my perspective, you could teach 4 weeks of this because this is so very important. I think it's more important than anything else at this particular moment.
Thank you. So we have to start our discussion back in the late 1800s. All right. The idea of Zionism is born. And Zionism is basically what? When we think of Zionism, what does that mean? Return to Israel. Okay? So the first ideas about Zionism are presented most notably through Theodor Herzl. We've heard that name before, Theodor Herzl. And Herzl was responding to events in the late 1800s and early 1900s, including the Kishinev pogrom in 1903, the assassination of Tsar Nicholas II in 1881, as well as the Dreyfus Affair in 1894. And it was very clear that at that time in history, there was a great deal of anti-Semitism, what we now call anti-Semitism. And the pogrom unleashed a great deal of terror and death. The assassination as well, and the assassination led to the beginning of the Aliyot to what was then Palestine, meaning that people from Eastern Europe left because they were afraid for their lives. The Dreyfus Affair, we have heard of before. Alfred Dreyfus was wrongly accused and imprisoned, and he was not exonerated and let go until many years later. And Herzl saw all these events, and he said, you know, there has to be a place for Jews to be safe. There has to be some kind of a homeland, a land where Jews can go where they are safe. So, Herzl's original vision, he was not attached to Palestine at all. Herzl just said anywhere, somewhere where Jews can be safe. And at the time, the ministers in England came to him and said, look, we got a place for you, Uganda. It's going to be terrific. We have a possession, do Uganda. And Herzl said, you know, that's a pretty good idea. And he presented it to the World Zionist Congress at the time, and half of the Congress said, oh, that's a good idea. The other half, which was made up basically of Eastern European countries, said, no way, Not going to happen. It's Palestine or nothing. They thought about it for a year, and when they reconvened a year later, they dropped the Uganda plan. So what's important about this is that Herzl embraced what we call political Zionism. Herzl wanted a place with borders, known borders, that would be a Jewish place. He didn't care where it was, but he wanted a political entity of a state where Jews could go. As Zionism, as an idea, began to catch on, different people had different reasons for wanting to settle in Israel, what we now call Israel, Palestine then. And by the time that 1947 and 1948 come about, we have a number of reasons why Jews want to go to Palestine, now Israel. And you'll recall that in 1947, the United Nations basically splits what is now the land of Israel into two parts, two basically equal parts. The Arabs get the east side, the Jews get the west side, basically. And they're basically equal amounts of territory. And the Jews said, well, it's not really what we want, it's not really enough, but we'll take it. And the Arabs say, no, thank you very much. And of course, we know what happens next. There are wars, there are invasions by the Arabs, and the state of Israel is born. And then Jews begin going to Israel. Now, as I said, there are a number of ideas why the Jews want to go to Israel in terms of the Zionist idea. So Herzl espoused what we call political Zionism, a place, doesn't matter where, but eventually he embraces Palestine. Then there is the idea of labor Zionism. These are Jews who want to go to Israel and settle in Israel, and they want to form an equal society. They're socialists. This is the labor Zionism movement is what spawns the kibbutzim. Everybody is equal. Socialism, you'll recall, especially for Eastern European Jews, was very good. Why? Because under the Tsar, we were the lowest on the totem pole. Everybody else had more than we did. What did socialism do? It equalized everything for everybody. The people at the top didn't like it, clearly, right? But the people at the very bottom liked it a lot because we were raised up. So the idea that Israel would become a place where all Jews were equal, that was a very attractive idea to many. And then we had something called liberal Zionism. And this was from the liberal European middle class. And they liked the free market system, they liked democracy, they liked the idea of human rights. And then we had revisionist Zionism. Revisionist Zionism was something that came up during the British Mandate of Israel, right? So Great Britain was basically running the country, and there were Jews there who didn't like that. They wanted to run the country themselves. They wanted England gone. And then there was cultural Zionism. And the most famous proponent of this was the writer Achad Ha'am. And this was the idea that Jews would go to Palestine to establish a cultural center in the world. It didn't have to do with religion, didn't have to do with political boundary. It had to do with establishing a cultural center for Jews to celebrate their culture. So there were a number of reasons. And then there was religious Zionism. And religious Zionism was, okay, Jews who want to return to Israel and make it a religiously Jewish state. That people in Israel would be Torah-following Jews. Okay. We have the... So political Zionism is how it begins. And all of these other forms of Zionism are lesser than in terms of numbers and importance, right? We have a number of secular Jews who are going to Israel because they want a safe place to be. Over the years, religious Zionism begins to slowly become more important. So the number of religious Jews who are moving to Palestine in order to help form a religiously based society becomes more and more and more and more important and more important and more important. So the first big kind of political party that we get in Israel, when it is first established in 1948, is the Labor Party. This is Ben-Gurion's party. And this was based on socialist labor Zionism. And in case you didn't know, so Israel has a parliamentary form of government. What that means is there is a prime minister who heads the government. That, of course, is Netanyahu at the moment. There is a president, Herzog, who is like a figurehead. He's ceremonial. He doesn't really do all that much. Just like Great Britain. And then what happens is the prime minister has to assemble a coalition of enough parties within the Knesset in order to retain power. So he has to have the backing of a number of parties in parliament in order to stay in power. Meaning that he has to go around to the different parties and say, look, this is what I'm going to do for you. Are you going to vote for me? This is what I'm going to do. You're going to vote for me. And I'm going to do. You're going to vote for me. And if he doesn't get enough people who say, yes, we're with you, then he's either not getting elected or he's getting thrown out of power. So it's really an end-all, be-all for a prime minister. He has to have enough members within his coalition to form the majority of seats in the Knesset. Okay, that's super important for us to understand. All right. The 67 war is a very big turning point in terms of Israeli politics. Because what happened in the 67 war? Israel, tell me something important that happened in the 67 war. We acquired a lot of territory, including the most important piece, half of Jerusalem, right? We got it back. We got all of Sinai, which we couldn't control. And Golan. So how did 67 war change things? There were many Israeli Jews and also diasporan Jews coming to Israel because of it, who saw the 67 war as a messianic deliverance. God was clearly on our side in that war, and he helped us to achieve all of our goals. And we got everything because of God. So, the religious Zionist fervor began to pick up. Following the 67 war, we have a movement called Gush Emunim, an ultra-nationalist, far-right party that advocated for everything belonging to the Jews. This is important because if we look at the settler movement today, settlers in the West Bank, and if we're reading the news and we're paying attention to what's going on, the problems in the West Bank with the settlers is significant. And the idea that the West Bank belongs to the Jews is very much Gush Emunim and very much part of the settlers' ideas. And so these ideas, following the 67 war, have carried on to the far, far, far right of Israeli politics, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. All right. Then comes the 73 war. And in many ways, people felt the same way. That, as you know, in the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War, Israel was attacked, and it was like this far away from being demolished. Golda Meir was on the phone talking about unleashing nukes, right? It was at that point. And then things turned, and the Israelis were able to turn the tide and win that war. And so it was perceived again as a second messianic deliverance, that God was on our side. And so the idea that religious Jews would go to Israel and promulgate the idea that Israel needs to be basically a theocracy, right? Everyone in Israel needs to be following Torah. Everyone needs to be religious, and it has to be a state that is based in Torah. Remember, Ben-Gurion wasn't particularly religious. And the idea that everything should be based in Torah was definitely not an idea that Ben-Gurion had espoused. Exactly. The antithesis, Gary says. Exactly. Okay. So, starting in the 67 and 73 war, we have the religious parties, the religious people in Israel having a larger voice. In government at that time, by far the largest party was the Labor Party, Ben-Gurion's party. You can see that here on the left, and that line in the middle is the center, right? So far left of center. In some ways, kinda, sorta, you could say the Labor Party is like our Democratic Party. And what you see up there, Likud, is sorta, kinda like the Republican Party. And then there are some parties to the very, very, very far right, and that's sort of like, I'm not going to get but it's sort of like MAGA, okay? And I'm just going to leave it at that because I'm not doing American politics. So that's kind of sort of the way we can understand basic alignment within the Israeli parties. Labor had by far been the most powerful and predominant force in Israeli politics for years and years and years and years. That changes. That changes big time in the election of 1977. In 1977, Menachem Begin and the Likud party become the dominant force within the government. And Israeli politics changes in a very large way. So since the 77 election, the religious component of the parties within the Israeli government have slowly gained more and more influence and power within the government. And the liberal Labor Party has lost and lost and lost and lost and lost. So we are in a situation right this minute where in which Israeli politics are dominated by the right and the far right. How did that happen? It happened because Netanyahu and Likud had to form coalitions within the Knesset, within the various parties who make up the Knesset, in order to retain his prime ministership. He had to make alliances within various parties within the government. The Democrats don't want to align with him. No, thank you very much. There is another party here, you'll see, Yesh Atid, which is a little bit left of center, not so much want to align with him. A little bit, but not so much. So where does he go? He goes to the far right to make deals with the far right. And so he makes the deals with the most religious parties, the religious Zionists, and the most conservative parties within the Knesset. And then they begin to dictate what he can and cannot do. Because if he does something that they don't like, they threaten to leave the government. Just last week, in Israeli politics, we had one of the very foremost ultra-religious leaders say that if you keep pushing the idea that the Orthodox have to enlist in the army, we're leaving. And if they leave, and if anyone else leaves with them, that's a huge problem for Netanyahu. So then he has to figure out, okay, what am I willing to give in order to keep my prime ministership? So this is the basic problem within Israeli politics. Likud as a party, Netanyahu's party, which is by far now the most powerful party and largest party within Israeli politics, Likud is center-right. Center-right. They are like what Bob Dole, those kinds of Republicans, John McCain, I guess, those kinds of Republicans in our government used to be. Kind of right of center, conservative. And we all understood, okay, some people have conservative ideas, some people have liberal ideas, and, we try to work together to figure out some common ground. All right. So, Likud is kind of right of center, but not very, very, very right. Although now they are becoming more and more and more right. So let's take a look at these parties. All right. So we have on the far left there, you see the Democrats. That's the Labor Party. And the combination of the Labor Party and what used to be known as Meretz, or I guess it's Meretz. It has to be because it's a segulite, an verb like Shemesh, the sun in Hebrew. Anyway, Meretz. And it is a progressive, secular party. Progressive, secular party. And the leader of that party, his name is Yair Golan. You see that in circles up there, Yair Golan. They have been relegated to really a very not important part in Israeli politics at the moment. They're almost they're not really relevant. And they used to be very, 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 very important. But Israeli politics have swung so much to the right that now they're very much irrelevant. You'll see next to them in the center left is a party that's called Yesh Atid. And basically it espouses liberal Zionism. And their leader, his name is Yair Lapid. That's a name that appears fairly frequently in the news, Yair Lapid, because Yesh Atid has a role in how the Knesset is voting and how policy is being made. That is a party that people want. It's large enough that people want to have that as part of their coalition. All right. Then we move to the center right, and we have Likud. And as I said, that's the largest party in Israeli politics. It's right-wing popularism. So, as I said, that's what the old Republican Party used to be, that we all grew up knowing. And that is led, of course, by Netanyahu. Then underneath that, you'll see that there is another party that's center-right that's important within the coalition, and it's called the National Unity Party. And originally, that had been a merging of another party that was called New Hope, and so now it's National Unity, and the leader of that party is Benny Gantz. That is definitely a name that you would know from reading the papers and listening to the news. Gantz was very, very important. If you'll recall, when he didn't like what Netanyahu was doing, what did he do? He left. He left the ministry. And that's a big deal. When a prime minister loses part of his coalition. Again, if the prime minister loses enough of his coalition, he's out. And then we have another party that's called Yisrael Beitenu, that is the inheritor of the revisionist Zionist idea. And Avigdor Lieberman, that's another name that is very prominent in Israeli politics, is the leader of that party. Now we move to the far right. And you have the Religious Zionist Party, headed by Bezalel Smotrich. That's a name that's all over the place everywhere, Smotrich. As well as, I'm going to go down to the third one there, Otzma Yehudit with Itamar Ben-Gvir. Those two names, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, are the two names that you have heard over and over and over and over and over again in the last 2, 3, 4 months. Because they are really the ones who are like keeping Netanyahu in power. If those two parties left his coalition, he's gone. We have Shas, which is a much smaller party, but important nevertheless, because every one of those seats in the Knesset is important. Their leader is Aryeh Deri. It's mostly a Sephardic Jewish party. And then you have Noam, which is headed by Avi Moaz. These four far-right parties right now are aligned with Netanyahu and allow Netanyahu to stay in power. If these four parties left the government, Netanyahu's government falls and new elections are held. Netanyahu clearly knows this, right? Now, 4 or 5 months ago, the reporting, and I'm giving you this second, third hand, I guess, because it's just the reporting. So I don't know how much of it is accurate and how much of it is not accurate. But the reporting suggested that at least 50% of the Israeli population was against Netanyahu continuing, so that if elections were held, Netanyahu would have been thrown out. As you see today, his stock has risen tremendously, because of the targeted assassinations of Hamas leaders and Hezbollah leaders. And so now Israelis feel much more like, okay, he's keeping us secure. He's giving victories to Israel. We're going to keep him in power. You all saw over the last few months the demonstrations, thousands and thousands and thousands of Israelis in the streets calling for Netanyahu to step down. Okay. And then, say again, has that stopped? We haven't heard nearly so much about the demonstrations. We have not. I-24 shows it. They are happening daily, but I don't think to the extent that they were. Yeah. And then you have down here, you have a party called United Torah. This is the Haredi party. The Haredi parties don't align themselves either left or right within politics. What United Torah wants is that the Haredi community observe Jewish law faithfully. They're not so concerned with what's going on out there. That shouldn't surprise us, right? The Haredi community is very insular. They take care of themselves. They worry about themselves. So they're not so concerned about all that other stuff that's going on. Their main concern is whatever policy is decided, that Haredi Jews remain Torah faithful. All right. So this is your situation right this minute in Israeli politics. This can change very, very quickly. Over the course of a number of years, since 1948, there have been many, many political parties that have come and gone. Different prime ministers aligned themselves with various parties over the years, and many of those parties don't exist anymore. They have morphed into what we have right this second. These are the largest parties. There are many other tiny parties in Israeli politics. Many. It's crazy. Many. These are the largest parties that have influence within the government. Yes, Gary.
I follow Israeli politics and the war on a daily basis, and I would like to know that right now 4, 5, and 6 young Israelis in the IDF daily are dying, either in Gaza or in Lebanon, how that's going to affect support for the war and Netanyahu's support.
Good. So let's talk about what are the platforms of the various parties. So the platform for Likud is nationalism, Jewish settlement, Jerusalem as the the united capital of Israel, no Palestinian state, and that there is a status quo between those in Israel who are religious and those who are secular. So, what you have is the idea of no Palestinian state, Jerusalem as the undivided capital, and the Jewish settlements in the West Bank stay. Yesh Atid, which is just slightly left of center, they are concentrated more on civic issues and reforms. They want equality in the military draft. They want to fight political corruption. They embrace a two-state solution. And they want to maintain whatever settlements are there, but they want to halt any further settlement activity in the West Bank. So that's the slightly left of center. The National Unity Party, and National Unity is towards the right. They see a two-state solution. They want to end corruption in the government. They want term limits for the various politicians. And they want a very large focus on education, Jewish education. Religious Zionism, the far right, that there is a strong, strong emphasis on Jewish identity, on nationalism, on Orthodox Judaism, the annexation of the West Bank, and no territorial concessions whatsoever. Now, one of the things that we have to be aware of that is coming into the discussion at the moment from the far right is they want Gaza back for Israel. They want Gaza to be taken back, the Palestinians to be relocated, and they want Gaza back as part of Israel.
How do these far-right and even Likud parties think they're going to resolve and end the state of war that Israel has been in since 1948 if they don't have a two-state solution?
How do you think? Look, we don't know what is in Netanyahu's mind. Is there anything, is what? Okay. But I think we can safely assume, this is my personal opinion, you may disagree with me, that as long as Israel is at war and fighting Hezbollah and Hamas, Netanyahu's position within the government is strong. He stays in power because the far right want Israel to be gaining territory. United Torah, hang on one sec, I'll come back. It's not Zionist at all. They want the status quo between religion and state, strict Jewish law for the Orthodox, and they say that math and English being taught in the schools is irrelevant. They want Torah Judaism taught. Shas end the prejudice against Mizrahi Jews. They want Jewish religious law as part of the law of the land, and no freeze on the settlements. Oh, I don't think anybody knows. Two-state solution simply means that in some form, which no one has been able to come up with, that there would be a country called Palestine, or a state called Palestine, and of course that exists next to Israel. The issues are huge. The biggest issue, I think, is the idea that in any Palestinian state, the Palestinians want East Jerusalem as their capital. It's just never going to happen. It's just never going to happen. I have seen some recent reports of turning Gaza into like a state that is administered by various Arab governments. That's kind of interesting. And then there would have to be some kind of other Palestinian state entity somewhere in the West. I don't know. This is for minds that are much, much, much smarter than I am to try to figure out. And no one has been able to figure it out. Right.
Gaza is part of that idea that belongs to the Palestinians.
Gaza is part of that idea that they belong to the Palestinians. Yes. General consensus is that Arab countries would be willing to be a stopgap for Gaza administration, but not a long term. I just think it's just so thorny a problem. I don't know what to tell you. What I can tell you is that the ideas from the far, far, farthest right, which is basically propping up Netanyahu's coalition right now, are ideas that we don't give up any territory, all of the settlements belong to Israel, and even Gaza needs to belong to Israel. Remember that up until 1965, there wasn't a people called the Palestinians. They were Arabs who lived in Palestine. In 1965, Arafat referred to them as a people, the Palestinian people, and since then they have taken on the status of a separate people from other Arabs. I've argued this a number of times. Argued, that's not the right word. I have presented this idea a number of times that in order for a people to be called a people, they need to have a separate language, a separate religion, a separate culture, a separate many, many things. Clearly, the Palestinian people are not separate from the Arab countries in terms of their culture and their language and their religion. So that's an issue unto itself. I don't know what will happen clearly with any idea of a two-state solution. But basically, to left of center embraces the possibility for a two-state solution. Right and very right don't. And at the moment, right and very right are controlling the government. Which is one reason why, we read about the violence in the settlements. And so, as a rabbi and a Jew, I am 100% behind Israel's mission statement that Hamas needs to be eliminated as much as possible, if it can be, and Hezbollah needs to be relegated to a political party without any military capabilities. I'm really good with that, 100% good with that. How that gets accomplished, I don't always agree with Netanyahu's methods. and nobody else in Israel agrees with each other, right? It takes two to tango, yes. Yes, if you want peace, your partner has to want peace too, and Zisel says that does not exist. And I agree with that. I do. I agree with that. So I just wanted you to be able to, when you look at the news now and you see names like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, either saying what has to happen or telling Netanyahu, if this doesn't happen, we're out of here, then you can understand, oh, they are the largest part of his coalition right now, and without them, he cannot continue to exist as a prime minister. Israeli politics is dominated by the right and the far right, and mostly by the far right now. So I don't know that certainly in the near future, if we can expect anything that resembles compromise, anything that resembles concession of any kind, anything that resembles movement towards the middle. Right now, this sounds so terrible, but I believe it's true. War is enabling Netanyahu to stay in power. And he knows that very well. He knows that he probably wouldn't still be in power without some kind of war. The October 7 massacre from last year was so devastating to his reputation as somebody who can keep Israel safe. It was so damaging that that he would have been voted out of power pretty quickly. Along with the idea that, look, we don't know what's going on in the most secret levels of the government, right? But it seems like Netanyahu's push for more war seems to be more important to him than figuring out some way to get the release of the hostages. And that is upsetting a huge portion of Israeli society. Again, I don't know what's going on in the bunkers of Israeli politics, and maybe that's an unfair way to portray Netanyahu. But much of Israeli society sees for him the idea that war is more important than bringing back the hostages who are still there.
Rabbi, public opinion shows that the overwhelming majority of Israelis support the war first rather than the hostages. You want to comment on that?
Israel has many problems. Hostages is just one of them. Netanyahu right now is facing a terrible dilemma. You have a war going on, and you also, I lost the bubble. Yeah, I got it back. He's losing, it's a war, soldiers die. And it's a many-front war. And there is a large number of able-bodied men who do not serve because they are Orthodox. And Netanyahu wanted to bring him into the army, and that is a very big problem. I say, bring them into the army.
So I'll just finish up here because I know you need a break. So the Israeli Supreme Court determined that the Orthodox have to go into the army, and the ultra-Orthodox parties within the Knesset now have said, "Look, we're not doing it. We're not doing it, and if you force us to do it, we are leaving the government." That's the kind of blackmail and the kind of power that is there. So we'll have to see in the coming weeks how that plays out, because these men from the ultra-Orthodox community are not trained soldiers. They have no, how would they help the army? Well, either they get trained or maybe they have some intelligence abilities with computer, I don't know. But perhaps we'll have to see how that goes in the coming weeks. I will just simply leave you with this, and that is that when you turn on the television now, when you read in the paper that decisions are being made and you see certain parties and certain names, you can say, okay, I get it now. The ultra-right is the Zionist religious parties on the far right are exerting their influence in order to make certain things happen. If they had their way, the West Bank would be annexed, and Gaza would probably come back to Israel. That's where we are. Yes, Zisel.
Soldiers can be trained. No one is expected to go on active duty fighting without training. Okay? So the fact that, I can't go in the service because I'm not trained is bobemaises. Nobody knows anything before being trained in basic training. I served 4 years, and I knew nothing about soldiering. When I went in, I knew a whole lot after basic training.
Let me just very, very quickly. I'm sorry, I forgot. The reason why the ultra-Orthodox don't want to go is because they feel that they are performing a higher, more important function in terms of studying Torah and praying for the state of Israel than if they were fighting.
Yeah, we want to thank Rabbi Mark for just a very interesting presentation. And I just have a suggestion. I know you're going to revert back to the diaspora, but I hope that because this situation does change periodically, that maybe I want you to, intersperse more current information about what's going on in Israel, with the diaspora, because it's very important to us to really follow this. I don't know if you all agree that, so it isn't just a one-time thing, if something happens, sure, thank you very much. So now we're on break, so thank you, Rabbi.
I mean, I knew that he was beheld. Yeah, but to me, it's like, it's amazing that he can't get enough support without assholes. Excuse me. Yeah, but also, you don't know if whoever gets elected is going to be worse than that. I mean,
That's right.
I mean, he's pretty bad, but.
take a picture of this real quick while
Yeah,
you,
okay.
of course. People find it very interesting.
It's fascinating and
Because we hear about all this stuff on the news, we
something
read
I
about
totally follow, but I don't have a clear understanding of Eastern groups. We can only do one at a time.
No problem.
Thank you.
Of course.
That's amazing. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.
I need a haircut. Very right. Yeah, mine is really terrible. So, Rabbi, if we could meet with you just a few minutes afterwards, if you have time.
Yes, I do.
Okay, cool.
I cleared it so that we could talk after.
Yeah, we can, I could put it out, you know.
Couldn't we go back to my office?
Yeah, we could do that.
So, I'm not sure what you had in mind when you asked me to do after this back.
That was Susie's idea, whatever you want to do.
So, I'm gonna do some hands-on type of things.
Okay, whatever you feel comfortable.
Because, we'll see how it goes.
I did like your idea of Jewish pirates, so I thought that would be fun.
I was thinking the other day, oh gosh, I really wish I could have done a Jewish pirates thing, because now that we know that Columbus is
Absolutely.
DNA's
It was Sephardic. It's Sephardic.
there's so much you can do with that too. And I thought, oh, that would be fun. But we'll just
Not only that, you know, my ancestry. I was able to connect up with Marina de la Caballeria, and she was a converted Jew. And she was her husband ran the government. He was sort of a viceroy of Tenochtitlan, which is Mexico City. And so he ran the government along with Cortez. And there was a whole, there were a lot of Jews that came over with Cortez. Yeah, escaping the Inquisition, and they just wanted to find a safe place to live. And so Marina was part of that group. So it's just fascinating. I
you
suspect that.
remember back in the day when I was here, we had a scholar in residence. And that scholar in residence was talking about all the hidden Jews
Oh, yes,
in New
yes.
Mexico, and we had the whole weekend of learning about those ways that the traditions were carried on and what people
Well, they were, and that was one group
yes,
that went up into New Mexico. But there were a lot of Jews elsewhere, not just in New Mexico, especially in Monterrey. There were, because I had,
the New Mexico, actually, there was soon after the Inquisition where people began, they went to Brazil, they went to Portugal, but that didn't work. And eventually they made their way over, to North America.
well, yeah, there were Jews from Portugal that went into Brazil. Going to the Inquisition records, you find a lot of Jews, of course, who were identified and some of them killed. And that was in the 1500s. Maria was also the 1500s. Mexico, I think, was colonized first by Cortez. And then Pizarro went into Peru, and then, of course, the Portuguese settled in Brazil. It's just fascinating to learn about the Americas and the Jews in the Americas, in the north. Settled up there, New York. But in Mexico, it's quite a lot of them. In government, mind you. It'd be interesting to talk about that. But anyway, that's another thing. But this is good. I mean, however you want to work it out. But it's really up to you. If you want to intersperse it like Rabbi did with this, I mean, he's talking about diaspora, and this is important for him to share.
You need a picture of this, take it now,
Yeah, and then
because I'm erasing the board.
so this is for, I didn't know all, I mean, I knew some of it, but not all. Nothing detailed.
Anybody else need this on the board, going once, going twice?
Ooh, I didn't. Did he have his, did he share that? I like this.
I'll send it to you, just a minute.
Does it come as a text or what? Oh, is it email?
Check it now.
Oh, yeah, probably, unless it's a it's the easy one, or it's all the design. Right. No, I don't see it yet.
I heard it sent, so check it out.
Is it email? Yeah, I think so.
Did everybody get enough snacks?
But the rabbi had it on the board. Yeah, it's still around.
It's very nice to see everybody again. So I would like to say a Shehechianu because it's very nice to come back to a season where we are learning together. And then we'll do the blessing. We'll do the blessing for learning first, and then the Shehechianu, because every day when we can learn and be together and encounter new things is always a blessing. So just for being together to learn, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Now we'll get ready to immerse ourselves in words of Torah, and we'll do Shehechianu together. Is there anybody here who's here for the first time? They're not there yet. Okay. So Shehechianu, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. It's wonderful to be able to be together. We're going to, Susie requested a discussion about ethics, Jewish ethics. So we will do that for at least part of this semester. We'll see if we move into something else. But I had a really interesting time going through a number, like maybe 10 different books on Jewish ethics that are fascinating. So I've kind of put it together for you. But today what we're going to do together is just have an overview of Jewish ethics. Over the time that we're together, we'll probably talk about
ethics in business, ethics in home life, ethics in medicine, different kinds of Jewish ethics questions and discussions. This is not even though we're going to be reading some really fascinating things that come from people who have authored about Jewish ethics, it's not a lecture. So what I would very much like is for us to step in and to share ideas about some of the things that we read together. I guess kind of like what I like to do overall, if we've been learning together. So what I want to start with this morning is something that I'm going to distribute to you. It doesn't have his name on it, but it's going to look like this: The World's Most Enduring Moral Voice, An Introduction to Ethics. And it's Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Alav HaShalom, who put this together, this introduction to where Jewish ethics comes from. And it's really fascinating. We may take a look at a second document. If not, I'm going to give it to you. And then I have a practical life ethics. Every week that we're together, we'll have a practical life ethics piece that will ask of us to think about our own lives and the way that we function. So I'll share that with you today. That's what I plan. I hope that's okay with you. So let's get started. Would somebody be willing to distribute these booklets? Thank you. Thanks, Bridget. Thanks, Berna. So don't look at it yet. You know how I am with regard to that. Don't look at it yet. Just tell me what you think ethics is. Anybody have an idea? How would you define ethics, ethical life, ethical action? How would you define it? A guiding force how to behave. Thank you, Susie. Anybody else? Okay. Janice is thinking about honesty. Zisel? A multi-pronged word. You can apply ethics to almost anything, and that's in human behavior. So, well, we could count God in there too, a little bit. So we'll see about that. But these are some ideas that people have as we get started. So we are going to have different people read today. We have another mic. I will read some of it so we're not constantly running around the room. But would somebody like to begin? Okie doke. Bridget? It starts at the bottom line on the first page with Judaism entered.
Judaism entered the world as a moral voice. It did so from the beginning, from its account of creation itself. There we read,
Almost.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Almost like a litany, God said, "Let there be," and there was, and God saw that it was good. The emphasis is on the word good. This is the language of morality, not myth, nor is it science. Physics and chemistry do not speak about the goodness of the cosmos, yet the Torah does, and for a reason. It wants us to know that there is a moral dimension to existence. Goodness is not something we invent. It is part of the text and texture of life as seen through the eye of faith.
Thank you. Okay, so what do we have first? First, we have the creation. So in Judaism, in Torah, from the very first creation of the world, we have what the message of Judaism will be all the way through history. God is creating the world, and God saw that it was good. And immediately, you have what some of you have already mentioned in one way or the other. How do we create goodness in the world, and who created it first? God. We're going to get to the difficulty of that. However, we just read Bereshit. I mean, it's so wonderful because we just ended the Torah and began the Torah again on Simchat Torah. And we read Bereshit this last week, and this week is going to be Noah, right? Noah. So here we have the beginning of the world, and when you look at it, if you go back to Bereshit and you look at it again, God saw that it was good, God saw that it was good, God saw that it was good. But God doesn't really say that when God creates people. So, what God will say after the creation of people is that God saw all of this as good, but not specifically people. So let's talk ethics about that now. How did God create us? Angels in Jewish life are created. We believe in angels, by the way, should you have any questions. They're very much a part of Jewish writings. One day we can talk about that. But angels do God's bidding. When you stand in a synagogue and you are in the middle of the Amidah, the Kedusha, and you say, Kadosh, 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 you are emulating angels. Angels could not move without God's permission. Angels could not act without God's permission. Angels were summoned and run by God. So should anybody, when you take a look at other religious traditions, that angels are the be-all and end-all, they are not in Judaism. They are messengers of God, but what don't they have? They don't have free will. And we were given by God free will, and free will leads us to this discussion of ethics. Why? Yes, we can do either bad or good. We have freedom. God deliberately created us that way. And that's probably why on the sixth day of creation, when we are made, God doesn't specifically say, yeah, it was good. Because could God know completely how we would behave? Well, we're getting to Noah this weekend. I think this is a great thing to think about as we're talking about all this ethics throughout the history, right? Go back to the beginning. This week, we're talking about Noah. And what happened? Yeah. God says, whoops. Something's wrong here. I better start from scratch. So next time you take a look at Bereshit and you see all the, it was good, it was good, it was good, it leads us back to something good. And that something good is also the thing that can be bad, which is we have choice. We have freedom. So that's where we're going to jump off from when we're talking about ethics. Because the next thing you need in a world where people have free will is a guideline. And what's our guideline? But it comes from somewhere. Where does it come from? Torah. What does Torah mean? Direction. Yeah, pathway. That's what we have. So it leads us to all of this that Rabbi Sachs basically says, and we can skip a little bit because the next he talks about, and you're welcome to read it at home, he talks about the fact that almost immediately, things kind of fall and have to be dealt with. What's the first thing that happens? So, yeah, well, we have Adam and Eve first, and they're very busy not doing what God said to do. And then we have, that's what you just said, Cain and Abel. And all of this happens very quickly. But what is very, very, very interesting about it with regard to ethics, are you guys okay? What's really interesting about it with regard to ethics is God had choices about this. We were in the Garden of Eden. We could have stayed in the Garden of Eden if we listened to God, right? But would that have been a good thing? No, seriously, I'm asking you. We're sitting here in Valley Village. We're learning. We've lived our lives. We've done good things in our lives. We've done less good things in our lives, because everybody does that. Would it have been better had we stayed for ethical reasons? Would it have been better if we had stayed in Gan Eden? What do you think? It would have been a much less what? Interesting life. Less complicated. That's true. That's true. And then when you're getting to the question of ethics with regard to that, and we're always yelling at God, who's responsible for those things? We are, absolutely, we are, which is why this whole ethics thing is what surrounds Judaism, and it all happened because God let us have choice, free will. So my perspective on Gan Eden is God made this happen. Because if God didn't want Adam and Eve to question, to choose, rightly or wrongly, God would not have created those first human beings to themselves have free will. Maybe we weren't meant to be in Gan Eden. Maybe we were meant to try to grapple with what it means to be an ethical person in our lives. And in that way, we become God's partners in the world. I don't know what you think. Any perspectives on this?
I think we had to.
You're too close for me to have to read.
No, it's okay. I think as a human being, you have to grow into your intellect. How would we get to where we are now? Well, we understand the glories of the universe and the cosmos because God allowed us to learn about these things, and that's part of free will, and that we need the ethics to guide us along in the process of expanding our minds and our abilities.
Yes, Cecil.
I think God was very intelligent, because if he hadn't made us the way we are, he would be bored to death.
God was very intelligent, because if God hadn't made us the way we are, God would be bored to death. And by the way, so would we. So would we. 1 second. God creates the serpent. Whether the serpent puts the ideas in Chava's mind, or whether it's just like a way for her to choose, is a different story. Janice? No. Wait, I was going to repeat her. It's okay. Okay.
So I got down to the bottom of the page, and it says, eventually.
Okay. You got to wait then, Janice. Hold on to it, please.
I'm holding.
Hold on to it. Okay. Yes.
They were so bored they didn't even last one day. And I've often pictured when, that God wanted a soap opera, and that's why he created our free will.
I would hope that God isn't creating soap operas. I would hope that what God was doing was trying to create partnership with people. Because even God sometimes in Jewish texts says, I need to be blessed. I need to take a look at what my choices are. That's very much a Jewish thing, that human beings make mistakes. But our whole guideline is, how do we deal with it? All right, so before we get to that, I thought it was really interesting in this text that how many people know about the fact that there are many, 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 many flood narratives throughout different people's histories? So if you go down to the story of Noah and the flood, right there on the first page, Cecil, do you want to read that part? I guess not. Yes, but you need to, can you come up? Oh, you're going to go ahead and read Noah, right, Janice?
I will read Noah. Right?
Okay, you've got the mic. Go for it now.
The story of Noah and the flood is testimony to the power of Torah to see history in moral terms. As is well known, other flood narratives existed in the ancient Near East, the most famously the Akkadian Enuma Elish. On the surface, the two narratives are similar, but in reality, they belong to different worlds. In the Akkadian story, the gods send a flood because they are irritated by the noise humans are making. They decide to silence humanity much as we might swat a fly. In the Torah, the flood narrative is inescapably moral. Humans have become corrupt. They live by might, not right. They are frustrating the very nature of creation. Noah alone is righteous. Therefore, God will start again with him.
Okay, stop right there. Okay, so we've got the fact that even with the flood that we'll get to this weekend, even with the flood, there's a different kind of narrative behind it. One of them is just annoyance with noise, and the other is looking at the whole of what the world is becoming. Does that make sense to you? Now, both of them are difficult. And Noah is said Sadiq Bedoro, righteous in his time. So Noah is probably the best of the lot, but rabbinic texts are not sure that means he is perfect, right?
Because it depends on how you treat the flood. I've had more than one flood. It depends on how you treat the flood. wasn't reading this. Eventually, it was Abraham.
No.
So you don't
No.
want me to do that
You
yet.
said you've had many floods. Finish that sentence.
Okay.
Put it close to you.
The biggest flood I experienced happened in 1972. And it moved from Philadelphia up into New York State, across the bottom of New York State, over to Jamestown, New York State.
And what was people, we're more concerned about
They don't-
what people's actions were.
People's actions were, we helped one another. There were places marked off, don't go here because it's not safe, so people knew what not to do. We saw,
So I think I'm going to stop you because what you said was that people helped one another. Can you pass the mic back? Thank you. So I want to move on from this, but there's a very big difference between the way people treated each other in the world that God destroyed and the way that people treated each other in Janice's description of being in the 1970s, how people helped each other. That's what was missing, and that's what God responded to. Not something minor, something major, a major glitch. And who takes responsibility for that major glitch? God. No, in your narrative, yes. But in the Noah narrative, we've got the first time that God says, exactly. I made a mistake. I have to do that. So the ethics question is not just for humans, although it is for humans. In Judaism, the ethics question is also for our Creator. So that's why I said it at the beginning, Cecil. Yes, Melinda? There's one right there.
But did the people really learn their lesson? And we have Sodom and Gomorrah coming up. And again, he had to destroy, a community as opposed to the world.
Right. So is it all solved? No. It's not all solved. But it takes having guidance to to work toward being an ethical community. And, I think a lot of people in this world, whether they are Jewish or they're not Jewish, really try to create some kind of ethical path for themselves. But when we are free-willed, bad stuff can happen. Bad stuff can happen, and bad stuff is happening. So the question that I guess we need to ask when we move into ethics, and I'm going to skip a little bit here, is would it be better, I just asked you ahead of time before, would it be better if we were not living in a world where people had free will? And some of you said, no. Yes. Right. So people want to be free. We want to be free because God gave us that possibility. So, and we know now that since we have that possibility inside ourselves, when people have to live in horrible situations where they're controlled, which is happening in a number of different places, then there is now a response by human beings. This morning, with regard to ethics, I was listening to the son and grandson of the Shah of Iran. he did a discussion on, interestingly enough, I listen to every kind of news, and this Shah of Iran discussion was on Prager University. They meet here every Shabbat. I get curious. And so he was talking about the fact that the people in Iran should not be linked to the dictatorship in Iran, because the people in Iran mostly want free will, they want open life, and it's the combination of rulers that have shut that down for them. So it's interesting, because we talk a lot about Iran now. People living there have ethics, but they do not have freedom. We have freedom, and sometimes people live with ethics, and sometimes they don't. Are we okay? Can we move on? Okay. So let's just take a look here on Yom Kippur, which we just had. This is the third page, not the front page, not the second page. It starts with "and just." Okay? So first of all, what Janice was going to tell you is that Abraham in the Torah, when God wants to kill the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, it's Abraham, the human that got free will, who stands at God and says, "Do you really want to do this?" So Abraham's ethics, given the opportunity given to him by God, turns around, looks back at the Creator and says, "Think." So that's when the human with ethical perspective goes to God and says, "You know what? Let's see if we can find a certain number of people that are in this society, and if we find them, you're not going to do anything to them." Problem was, they didn't find enough of them, which is another interesting discussion about ethics. Is ethics a singular thing? Each of us, in each of us? Or is it a communal thing? Anybody have anything you want to?
I think ethical behavior is individual, but is also communal, and that as a society, you do have to support the idea of ethical behavior. I mean, otherwise we would have pandemonium, to be honest.
Okay. So it's both individual and it's communal. How do we turn, let's say everybody in this room is the most consistently ethical person that could ever be. Not. It's not true of any of us, but let's say that were the case. What would our responsibility be, and actually what is our responsibility when we look at ourselves with a strong sense of ethics? We try. Do we keep that to ourselves, or is it our responsibility to try and learn more, teach more, share more? So if we, just let me say this so I don't forget, hold on to your thought. If we see, for example, somebody harming a dog, an animal, It really is our ethical responsibility to be able to go and to intervene or to help, but sometimes we don't do that because we think that if we do, the harm will come to us. Did I put it properly? Did you have anything else you wanted to say? So have we all been in that situation? We all have. But in Bereshit, very soon, like the next Torah portion, we have Avraham. You cannot be in a more difficult situation than telling God that God might be wrong. If God already started the world over once and you're the guy standing there saying, God, I think you have to think differently, I would imagine that somebody would not know whether the response would be, okay, I'll think about it, or and you're not there anymore. I'm not sure about that. I'm kind of, what?
I think God listened to Abraham because he had a mind of his own. That is, Abraham with a strong personality. And that's very important to God, to have someone like that to provide leadership. So he did listen. God did listen to him.
So that's true, but not everybody starts out with a strong personality. When you see Moses at the beginning of the Torah, you see a guy who is not really sure of himself. He developed into it. And that is part of the whole question of ethics in Jewish life. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be fully formed. But through our entire life, we need to be striving for more. Yes.
Well, that's like in Professor T, they talk about how people get to be criminals, and they get to be it incrementally. They do something a little bit bad, then they do something a little bit more bad. So it's the same way with being good. You got to start and you got to keep going and incrementally get better, right?
So in Judaism, there's a very smart thing that really annoys people no end, which is if you're observant of something, there's always a law made that has a fence around it. In other words, makes it more stringent than it really needs to be. Because even from before the 1st century of the Common Era, people knew that people would push the limit. And so these incremental things happen in our lives all the time. Now, sometimes they're not related to ethics, but sometimes, as you put it, Bridget, they are. You're right. They say when somebody commits a particular crime, if they commit it and get away with it, then the next time is easier, the next time is easier after that, and suddenly you have a really bad situation. But let's go to Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, there are a heck of a lot of things that we could be talking about in the Haftarah, and this is what we say. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is this what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this kind of fasting I have chosen to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter, when you see the naked to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? There we are on Yom Kippur, where we're supposed to be individually looking at ourselves, and what gets thrown at us in the Haftarah, chosen by our sages. This isn't just about you. This isn't just about your individuality. This is how you use your ethics in other kinds of ways. It's kind of nice, isn't it? I mean, I think a lot of us get to these parts in our services or in the things we learn, and we don't pay the same kind of attention to it. So this is what Rabbi Sachs said on the next page. And I love it because he was a great Orthodox rabbi, but he was unafraid to set people straight. So on the next page where it says Torah study today, does somebody want to read that? Come up. See, I wanted to do this with you today because I thought he did such a beautiful job of introducing the whole idea of ethics and how widespread things are in life and how many different ways there are to looking at what your ethics are going to be.
Torah study today, beautiful though it is conducted by microscope rather than telescope. It focuses on individual brushstrokes, not the larger picture. One example illustrates the problem. There is a town in Israel where some very religious people objected to the clothes of an 8-year-old, a modern Orthodox girl on her way to school. Though modestly dressed, for them it was not enough. They spat at her and insulted her. What struck me about that episode was that undoubtedly each of the men concerned was punctilious to cover the challah on Shabbat while making kiddush. The reason we do so is to avoid shaming the challah by letting it see that we have chosen to do a mitzvah with the wine before the bread. Sorry. When people are fastidious, not to humiliate a loaf of bread, but have no compunction in shaming a fellow human, then, as Shakespeare said, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. The secular societies of the West also seem to have lost their way. There is a crisis of trust as scandal has followed scandal. Bankers taking irresponsible risks, journalists tapping phones, sexual misconduct by people in public life, leaders failing to lead, politicians failing to be statesmen, the collapse of basic values like honesty, integrity, duty, and honor, and fundamental institutions like marriage and the family.
Okay, we'll go there. I'm glad you continued. I wasn't planning that, but yeah. Okay. So, he's wonderful because he says, don't let yourself go on the wrong path. Don't let yourself go on the wrong path. Create your ethics in a way that doesn't focus you negatively on some particular things or people. What we need to do, he says, is to recognize that we're not supposed to look at those kinds of minutia, that we're supposed to be kind and outreaching to people, and even if they might be a little bit different than you. And from the perspective of what Rabbi Sachs is trying to say, don't get stuck in your religious minutia, but that could span different parts of our lives. And in the world in which we live, where we're very judgmental of one another, maybe there's some ethical work that needs to be done there too.
I think this is all very relatable to today's ethics or lack thereof. We're living in a very confused world right now. I don't want to bring politics into it.
No, don't bring any politics into my classroom.
No, but it's very difficult with all the different opinions and everything that you're surrounded by, and it makes me a little crazy at times, you know. I'm trying to do the right thing, and I want to do the right thing, and how do we do the right thing with the chaos that ensues, you know? Everybody should be in therapy, you know? It's very difficult to absorb all this. That's what I'm saying. That's all.
I think that you're right, but
Yes.
does that make it less responsibility for us to be able to find that ethic, or does it make it more of something that we need to do?
It's more difficult in the society. You have to live within the bounds of society. I mean, you can't lock yourself in the house and say, no, I'm not going to go out, I'm not going to watch television, I'm going to live my life. You have to find a way, and it's difficult to find a way when there's a lot of chaos around. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The only question the only question that I'm asking is, well, there is a Jewish saying, in times when there is no mensch, strive to be a mensch. So with regard to how difficult it is, I think it's absolutely true that it's so difficult. If we, particularly as Jews now, but certainly as human beings, whenever we turn on the news or we look at something on Instagram or wherever people go to look at things, it's very difficult. But one of the things that we learn in the Jewish community is when that happens, don't be weak, stand up, but still act with integrity. And I think that in this difficult world, that strive to be a mensch has to still be internal to us because we got a gift. And the gift that we got was the right to choose. We grew up and we've been in millennia of a religious tradition that allows for us to be individuals and to have our ethics and to be in a community that has ethics and teaches ethics together. And that's something that we should really be proud of. Let's go down to, I hope you'll take a look at this yourself, because Rabbi Sachs really did an amazing thing. But let's go down. Historian Will Durant gave the most apt description of what happens to societies when they lose their faith. I was at the bottom of that page that starts Torah study today. Yeah, lose their faith, right? So that's what's your next page? Intellectual history? Okay. Takes on the character of a conflict between science and religion. Got that? Institutions were at first in the hands of the clergy, like law and punishment, education and morals. All of those things are now not in religious circles. Yeah, there's no numbers, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I could not talk to Rabbi Sachs to... So they're saying that our society has lost its bearings. Our society has lost its bearings. At the very beginning, we talked about the fact that science doesn't create morality. Intellectual discussion doesn't create morality. There are certain aspects in our lives that help us, to guide us, to have, to be able to have ethics and morality. That used to come from religious traditions in varying different ways. But the society that we live in globally is either religious, yeah, but I was going to say there's no medium in many parts of the society, which is you're either absolutely fire-filled with a particular religious perspective that doesn't help to create any kind of ethic. It creates war and murder and that kind of thing. Or you have thrown out the religious aspect being the thing that really guides you in your life. So that's one of the things that he says. But here's the last part. If you take a look at the, hold on a second, down at the bottom of that page, it says, order in a free society. A great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself within. So we're watching that in the world in some ways. Order in a free society, a couple lines down, do you see it? Is brought about less by police and surveillance than by a sense of right and wrong engraved on the hearts of citizens. Those lessons learned in school, observed in the home, and kept by community. So we know that. All of us grew up at a time when things were expected of us that were ethical. We grew up in a time where we stood to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we learned how to treat other people, and we were chastised if we did not. There are bad and good things to all of those things, but what Rabbi Sachs said is that we're missing a society where those kinds of things are ingrained, and other kinds of things are ingrained instead. So he says, let me just say this. He says, we're all living in places where we call the police when something happens because we have to, or we look to different kinds of societal things that they've created in order to take away some of the fear or problems that we have. But they also have to come from us. We have to stand up with the ethic. We have to be brave enough for it.
Yeah, I agree with Shirley. You know, what she's saying is a breakdown of society. So the question is, how do we rebuild society? As an individual, as a group, is it the responsibility of religious organizations to bring us back to how things should be in terms of ethical behavior? Who is actually going to help us do that? I know you mentioned individual, but as individuals, we should group together with others to form a cohesive group that will turn things around. I mean, we see this, you don't want to talk about politics right now, but in general, I think society is breaking down, especially in America.
Thank you. So, there are a lot of different ways that you can look at this. Nobody here is trying to say how you form your ethics. But as we move through this class,